The Cincinnati Bengals did not get the help they needed on Sunday, and after missing the playoffs, they make major coaching changes. Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. We are Locked On Bengals here on the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. We're on YouTube or everywhere you get your podcasts, and welcome back to all of you who make us your first listen every day, and all the everydayers out there. We appreciate all of you very much. We've got an exciting start, a bit of a bittersweet start, but a lot of changes either way for this Bengals offseason happening very quickly as this offseason begins for the Cincinnati Bengals. They didn't get the help they needed on Sunday, James, and we're going to dive into those coaching changes in an episode brought to you by FanDuel, where if you win your first $5 bet, you will get $200 in bonus bets, and you can check that out at FanDuel.com to get started. James, let's dive into these coaching changes, and maybe we talk about the way the season ended as well. The Chiefs not really trying in Denver, but as the Bengals miss the playoffs, they are moving on from at least 4 coaches in the immediate aftermath of the 2024 season.
Yeah, the change was coming. It felt like it was inevitable, and we get it. And they didn't hesitate. They didn't make any last-ditch effort or anything like that. The dead cat bounce that you were talking about didn't really matter, because the Bengals moving on from Lou Anarumo early Monday morning, James Bettcher, Marion Hobby as well, their linebackers and defensive line coach, and also offensive line coach Frank Pollack. So 3 defensive coaches, 1 offensive line coach. Also worth noting that Zach Taylor was asked about Charles Burks and multiple in Kovacs as well, the safeties coach, Jordan Kovacs, and no vote of, oh, they're definitely going to be here. And he said it's kind of dependent on the new defensive coordinator, that they would work that out with the new defensive coordinator, whoever it is. So a lot of moving parts. I would start here, Jake. And I'm at Paycor Stadium now as we recording this. I'm 2 seats over from where Zach Taylor was when he met with the media. And it was on Zoom as well because of the snowstorm we have in Cincinnati. And he said it was his decision. And that's what I think is where we should start before we dive into Lou and go from there. Is Zach Taylor owned this decision, said it was time for a change, said it was his decision, said he talked with ownership in the front office. And so this is Zach Taylor leading the charge here for replacements, including a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, and it's easy to see kind of the alignment between the coaches that were immediately moved on from and the most disappointing units on the team. There's a very direct connection there, right? The offensive line was not up to the standard that they needed to be. They couldn't pass block well enough. And Zach talked about wanting to control games better and all this stuff too, but they also couldn't run to close out games. And so you have an offensive line where the run game isn't working as well as you wanted to, even though Chase Brown had a better year. In key moments, they can't run when they need to be able to run the ball. And Joe Burrow is still taking way too many hits, way too much pressure, and having to create way too much outside of structure. In large part, early in the year, we talked a lot about schematic stuff where he had to create, but a lot of it is just pressure and him having to second react play because of pressure issues. So you got the offensive line coach. Everybody that I did a poll at 2:30 in the morning Eastern time on Twitter. And most people were asleep, but by the time I woke up and saw the news, a lot of people were ready to move on from Lou Anarumo, from Frank Pollack specifically. And then beyond that, you look at the defense on the whole, which the stat was they've produced a top half DVOA season once in the last 5 seasons since Joe Burrow was drafted. That was a Shield Kapadia tweet earlier today that pointed that out. So on the whole, the defense isn't really getting those kinds of results, even though we've seen Lou Anarumo get the defense to step up in playoff performances. And we've seen the defense make game-winning plays for them in playoff performances. it just hasn't been consistent. And then in addition to that, you get the defensive line coach, where we saw a massive drop off from last year to this year in pressure and in run defense. And they've lost some pieces there for sure, but there's been a real lack of development there. That was a theme, I thought, when you listen closely to what Zach Taylor had to say, is getting the most out of players. In a press conference where he didn't want to go into too many details about why it was time to move on and what he was looking for. And, there were great questions asked by you and your colleagues about, like, what is it that needs to be different, or what is it that needed to be better, or you're looking for, and some good questions that were more specific than that. I'm summarizing that Zach didn't want to get into. The one thing that we did hear him say is getting the most out of the players. And I think that there's a theme there when you look at some of the defensive coaches in particular that they kept for now. Like you said, not a huge vote of like they'll be here for sure, but Charles Burks, Jordan Kovac, Mark Duffner, Louis Siafi, not actually sure how to say his last name, and Ronnie Regular, Kofi, of course, that's par for the course for us, and Ronnie Regular, the 5 defensive coaches still on the staff, some quality control.
Kovacs, by the way, CS.
And so while there are certainly questions about the safety position, you can see the themes there, right? And the coaches with seeing some development in young players at the cornerback position versus seeing regression elsewhere on the defensive side.
Yeah, I think it's such a unique thing, because there's going to be a lot of our listeners and viewers, Jake, that are like, why the hell would you get rid of Lou? He doesn't have Jesse. He doesn't have DJ Reader. He doesn't have this guy. He doesn't have that guy. And I get that. I think there's a good argument that can be made for Lou. And I think the organization knows he's still a good coach. It's not like Zach Taylor's like, he can't coach. I don't think it's that. I think it's a mixture of things. One, sometimes you need a new voice. Two, the defense couldn't figure it out this year and didn't figure it out. Let's be honest here. The season was essentially over, and then they played a little bit better, and that was aided by their opponents and all of those things. And even though they played a little bit better, you don't want to judge it by a late December run. Historically, that is not the smart thing to do. But it's not just that. It's the development, to your point, and the alignment. And I think that's big, because if you're Lou Anarumo and you get Miles Murphy and you get DJ Turner and you get Jordan Battle and you get the year before Dax Hill and you get Cam Taylor-Britt and you get, there were drafts where it was the Lou show. The first 2 days of the draft, we're seeing Lou in a suit up here where I'm sitting right now if you're watching on YouTube. And we didn't see Brian Callahan. We didn't see the offensive line pick that we were thinking that they were going to make. And it was because they were like, all right, we're going to invest in this defense. Lou's going to be able to coach them up and maximize them. And it's not all on Lou, because the verdict's out on these guys from a front office standpoint. But I think that played a role as well. The development in seeing how to use some of these guys. I don't have any doubt in my mind that other organizations would have found a way to use Dax Hill as a rookie. I just think he's such a versatile piece. You'd find a way to use him. Doesn't mean he's got to be a deep safety. Find a way to use him. And then the second year, you're like, we'll go play deep safety and expect him to just take over for Jesse Bates. It's just a tough ask. And so I think there was some frustration there, some friction there. And so it's a mixture. It's not just because they stunk this year on defense. It's much deeper than that. Will it fix it? That's the real question, because it needs to fix it now. And I think that's something a theme of the offseason that we're going to continue to open up, is how this defense evolves, how they can figure it out and be much better moving forward.
And where they go next is such a pertinent question that we will dive into over the course of the week, and we'll probably get some reports about interview requests very, very soon as well. But there's more to it, like you said, in terms of player development and investment, and this entanglement in Cincinnati that we've talked about for so long. That is, well, which of these draft picks are Lou Anarumo picks, and which of these draft picks are front office picks, and was Dax Hill the canary in the coal mine, and the clear disconnect between the front office and Lou Anarumo that we heard about, and it was very loud this previous offseason. But not only that, like the spending on veterans and the veterans they're choosing to bring in, and the fits that are or are not happening, and the spending and all of this stuff. We will continue to dive into those topics a little bit more as we wrap up the conversation on the Lou Anarumo firing with 1 year left on his deal, I believe. And
Yep.
we'll continue that conversation before we talk about some of the other coaching changes coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action. That's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football, you want a chance to win real money while watching games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards, rushing touchdowns, and you get a shot up to win 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has you covered. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, that's PrizePicks. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game.
The Cincinnati Bengals, by salary cap numbers, had the fourth most expensive defense in the NFL in 2024. They spent the fourth most of their cap space on the edge rusher position in the NFL. They spent the ninth most on the interior defensive line in the NFL. They spent the fourth most at linebacker. They were not as expensive at safety or corner. Is there some alignment there, perhaps, with the coaches they chose to move on from? Linebackers coach out in James Bettcher, defensive line coach Marion Hobby, and obviously Lou Anarumo when you take in the overall spending there. And it's not only that, like you said, James, the amount of draft capital that they've invested on that side of the ball has been significant. And so this is where it's tricky, right? Because there's this mitigating factor for Lou, which is that he did not want to lose Jesse Bates and DJ Reader. And he was correct about those assessments, I think, and certainly for Jesse Bates. And I think that Jesse Bates is in the back of Joe Burrow's mind when he's saying you don't want to see great players leave. You don't want to make a great habit out of letting great players leave. And I think if Jesse Bates is on this team, the impact that he makes on the back end in terms of putting out fires and covering up mistakes for others and elevating the play of the secondary overall and the entire defense overall is really easy to understate and kind of hard to quantify from a statistical perspective. But beyond that, and that is a mitigating factor, they had spent all of these resources on defensive players. And despite all of the spending of draft picks and of money, getting that kind of result from your defense year in, year out, where, like I said, they have one top half DVOA performance, which is a formerly Football Outsiders, now FTN metric that kind of evaluates in a holistic manner, tries to put one number on defensive performance. It speaks to an underachievement that the Bengals clearly felt they needed to make a move there. And like you said, get a new voice in the room, whether it's to raise the floor, because I think that's really part of what we're talking about here is Lou Anarumo's defense had a ceiling, but there was no floor. He raised the ceiling, I think we saw, against really good teams in the playoffs.
Sure.
But there was no floor. And I think we saw that against like Mike White and this year and many times.
Russell Wilson. I mean, the giving up 37 to that Steelers team at home is unacceptable. Jaden Daniels lights you up. Okay. You know, you get beat by a really good Eagles offense. Okay. Lamar Jackson's Lamar Jackson. Like, okay. But it's Russell Wilson in the year 2024 with the Steelers in your home stadium. And so I think what Zach Taylor's saying, what this entire organization is saying by saying, hey, Zach, go ahead, make the move, is, yeah, you should be getting more out of Myles Murphy. He's a really talented player. He should be better right now. And Lou and Marion, you guys didn't do enough to get him to where he should be by now. He should be contributing at a much higher level. He should have a sack in his second year, multiple sacks in his second year. Dax Hill, we shouldn't have to wait till year 3 to figure out what Dax can be as he's going into the final year of his rookie contract. Cam Taylor-Britt, why is he regressed when we saw that Charles Burks can coach up, and maybe this is what they're thinking, that can coach up Dax Hill at corner? Like, why is Cam being put in these situations. Like, I don't know. I think they believe they have more talent than they saw on the field from a results standpoint. And so that's it. We'll see if they're right. I will say this. I do think that when Zach says, all right, we got to make this call. I don't know if you have anything else on Lou, but we got to make this call on these guys. It does add pressure to him now. You only get to do this once. You only get to go into Mike Brown's office and say, all right, well, I want a new DC, new offensive line coach, new defensive tackle, or new defensive line coach. And who knows, maybe new defensive tackle for sure, I would say, this offseason. But the point is, like, you only get this button once, I would say. And so we'll see what happens. But it's fair to say that Zach has much more pressure on him going into 2025, even though when I asked him about it, he said, I don't view it as pressure, which I get. Shouldn't. It's probably not good for your mental health if you do, but it's certainly more pressure on him going into next season.
Yeah, you get to do this once typically, unless you run it back and you have another run of success and then things fall apart again. But even then, at that point, I mean, Cincinnati might be the only place you would get the third chance or fourth chance.
He's kind of on 3 now, you know?
Yeah, that's why I said our fourth. I did have one more thing on Lou. The thing that I would be looking for, and we'll get into specifics.
Yeah.
And some of the specific guys is consistency is such an issue with this defense.
Sure.
And that's what I'm talking about when I say there is no floor.
Mm-hmm.
There needs to the apparent inability to get guys on the same page from a schematic perspective, and the amount of coverage bust we've seen in the last 2 years, where maybe it's just too complicated without Jesse Bates and Von Bell being your veteran leaders back there. Maybe it's just that your scheme isn't clicking with the new players and the young guys that they've brought in. Maybe the message isn't hitting with the young guys and new players they've brought in. I see that as one of the big things, is getting the buy-in, elevating the floor, schematic consistency. And part of it also is just maybe that Lou's been around with the Bengals for too long and opposing offenses had the book on him. And that could be part of it too, where they just know what Lou wants to do, and whatever Lou wanted to try is not working anymore. But the other side of it is, of course, that he earned that mad scientist moniker for a reason, of cooking up great game plans in playoff games and high leverage games. We've seen him do that as well. So I think there's a chance that they do end up missing that. And I hope they cast a wide net. There's obviously some big fish out there, some really high-end defensive coordinator prospects that were formerly head coaches. And obviously we're going to talk about Robert Saleh and Dennis Allen and that kind of level of coach. But
you're talking about Rex Ryan. Get out of here. Get out of here, Jim.
I would have made a foot punt of some sort if we were talking about Rex Ryan. Football.
Looking for a football coach.
We can do better than that. We will get to the defensive coordinator candidates, of course, tomorrow. And then there's plenty of stuff that we're not going to get to today in the first day of the offseason that I'm sure you want to hear about. You're alluding to new defensive tackle. Yeah, we're going to talk about the offseason priorities and all those things as well. But we still have some coaching changes to talk about here.
Let's get to Frank.
Well. And the big one is Frank that we're going to get to here to finish up the show, because I do think that there's an opportunity for significant improvement on both sides of the ball here, depending on the direction they go with DC and offensive line coach. And so let's dive into the offensive line coach changes coming up next.
I love going to live events, and whether it's sports, music, theater, comedy, the off season in full swing. And it's about that time to do some of my favorite things, which is why you got to get the Gametime app. I've used Gametime multiple times. I'm hoping to get to a couple of NBA games this year. Guess what I'm going to use? Gametime. It makes it so easy to get tickets to your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. It filters out all the fluff and only shows you incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I've had friends, I've had family use Gametime. They all love it. I've had family use it to go to Bengals games. Obviously, the Bengals not playing a game for quite some time, but any live event you can think of that you're thinking, I might go to that. check out the Gametime app and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. That's Locked On NFL. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
We've obviously talked a lot about potential coaching changes, and now that they're no longer potential coaching changes, Frank Pollack is a name that has been often discussed in the Bengals media sphere. And it's a change that when we've discussed it, James, we focused a lot on the fit, the schematic preferences, Frank Pollack's background, and what the fit would be with a offense that is built around Joe Burrow. That is probably the crux, in addition to performance issues, of what led to this move for the Bengals.
Yeah, I think fit is fair. I think when you look at, like, when I think of Zach Taylor's style in general, in the way this offense operates, and you look at the coaching staff, so you have Zach, you have Dan Pitcher, you can look at Brad Cragthorpe, the quarterback's coach. You could go down the line, right? Jordan Salkin, the guy they hired from Oregon last year, who is, I think, impressed and been a big part of what they've done this year. Who am I missing? I'm missing one more that they brought in from Minnesota. Yeah, Justin Riscotti. I don't want to leave anybody out since I was going to go down that rabbit hole. They all seem to have a certain style, and Frank isn't necessarily that style, and I do think that matters. I do. Like the approach, the way it is, and you can have a rough and tough, gruff, old school offensive line coach, but I think that's the other element here is, yeah, you want to get the marriage together between the run and the pass. Has it ever felt like it has? Has it ever felt like it has worked? And this is before Frank, for what it's worth, but it doesn't feel like it's humming on all cylinders. And that's something that people have an issue with. And then the other element is, again, I think style-wise, I just look at that offensive staff, and then you look at Frank, and it's just like, well, maybe a different voice is needed. I think Frank, much like Lou, and people here think Frank stinks. Like, there are a lot of people that don't think Frank is a good offensive line coach. I talked to multiple offensive linemen today. He's a good coach. They love him. Like Orlando Brown Jr. went on and on camera, off camera. It's the same thing. And it's one of those things where it's like, all right, well, maybe a new voice is needed. Maybe you want a style fit. Maybe you need to figure out the scheme element of it. But that doesn't mean he won't be an offensive line coach somewhere. I think it does fit, much like Lou. And so finding the right fit that can work and be an upgrade and get you to where you need to go. It's going to be challenging at defensive coordinator. It's going to be challenging at offensive line coach. But yeah, I get why they made the move, and it's up to them to find the right hire.
And interestingly, Derek Frazier, the assistant offensive line coach, is, for now at least, still on the staff as far as the Bengals website, which has been updated for coaches that have been let go, indicates. And he wasn't mentioned, of course, in any reports today. So I do find that interesting. But Frank Pollack, theoretically, is a fit with Zach Taylor's offense. If Zach Taylor was running the Sean McVay offense, which is what we thought he was going to try to bring to Cincinnati. And I think he did try to bring to Cincinnati. And then Joe Burrow came along, and Joe Burrow wants a different kind of offense.
And he's better in a different offense too. It's not just once. Like, he's awesome.
Oh, yeah. No, he excels. We just saw a great season in an offense that puts a lot on his plate and asks him to drop back and make 7,000 decisions in a second and find the best place to go with the football.
Mm-hmm.
He's not as good. He could be. I don't doubt his ability here, but he hasn't gotten the kind of production when he goes under center in that kind of wide zone play action game. And that's where Frank comes from. And so if you can find a coach who can fit with your offensive philosophy that you've built around your star quarterback and your star wide receivers, then perhaps you can take that next step as an offense. And this is a productive offense, but they're a productive offense by putting a ton on Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins plates. And they got a little bit more out of Chase Brown, right? Like, I don't mean to diminish Chase Brown's role here, but the offense could certainly benefit from a running game that could close out games and guards who could actually block. I mean, that's a big thing. So for all the praise you're hearing from Orlando and from Amarius Mims, who credited Frank for standing on the table to bring him into Cincinnati and credited Frank for the kind of coaching that he got from Frank Pollack this year. Sounds like Amarius and Frank Pollack had a great relationship. Orlando Brown praising Frank Pollack for helping him to develop as a pass blocker this year, in a year that was great for him as a pass blocker, especially when he was fully healthy. It's not like Frank's in a vacuum terrible coach, like you said, but he might have been a terrible fit for what they were trying to do in Cincinnati and what they will be trying to do around Joe Burrow going forward.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the fit, the style, all of the above certainly matter. And I think about the way this needs to look. And at times it would be nice, not just to close out games, maybe to start games, knowing that you're going to need Joe to close. Hey, we're going to run it here and we're just going to impose our will. And part of that is personnel. In much like Lou, where you can make the argument, you can make the argument with Frank. Like, Frank didn't want Jackson Carman. I can say it now. We can all say it. It's not like he was like pounding the table for Jackson Carman, right? He was given Jackson Carman. In the very next year, he was like, hey, I would much rather have a kid from North Dakota that is a fourth rounder that might not have the physical talent, but is going to do all the hard working stuff. Right. And so I think that's what's interesting is it's like Amarius was his first rounder. It's kind of the opposite of Lou in that element. It's not like they used a bunch of draft capital on offensive line and said, Frank, develop him. He didn't get many opportunities to do that. But the fit, the style, all of the above, I think that's interesting in what they try to find, because Joe Burrow is going to get hit in this current style. And if you can just alleviate that by 3, 4, 5 snaps where he's getting those hits, and instead you're leaning on the run a little bit more, or you're making it easy on him. You have an easy button where he doesn't have to scan the field like crazy. It would be nice. And so we'll see if they can get there. I think that the offense could certainly take some steps forward, and maybe this will help them do that. They got to find the right guy, though, and the right coach that can not only be an upgrade, but a better fit, to your point.
And this coach is likely taking over the run game coordinator title as well, which is something that Frank was doing in his role as offensive line coach. Not uncommon around the NFL. And you're talking about making Joe Burrow's life easier. One thing that makes Joe Burrow's life easier, and we saw the Bengals doing this year with Eric All in this shift to 12 personnel and doing a little bit more 12 personnel with Eric All, with Mike Gesicki, who we're going to have to talk about Mike Gesicki's future with the team as well. And he had some interesting comments in the locker room on Monday that we'll get to in tomorrow's show, and our next show, most likely, as maybe, I don't know, maybe it'll be in 2 days. We have a lot to get to this week, James. The inability to sit back there when you're Joe Burrow and see that, oh, they only have 6 guys in the box. They only have 7 guys in the box. We have a numbers advantage between the tackles here. I should be able to hand the ball off and get 6 yards. And the amount of times that he saw that and thought he could get 6 yards and instead got 1 or 2 yards makes life harder for the offense. And we've seen that throughout this season. So like you said, it's not just closing games. It's also staying ahead of the chain, staying on schedules and offense, and punishing defenses for saying, we're going to keep a safety over T. Higgins and Jamar Chase the entire game. You got to be able to do that.
Yep. And so part of it's personnel, much like defense, right? This defense is going to look a lot different. That interior of the offensive line is going to look a lot different. I'm confident in saying Orlando Brown Jr. and Amarius Mims are going to be the tackles, right? I think Ted Karras is going to be the center, but those 2 guards, it could, probably will look a lot different. And that is the good part, I would say, about these changes is you're not going to have the loyalty to some of these guys that you're like, if they're healthy, if things are perfect, well, that, and so we can dive into that, but there's just so many questions on both sides of the ball, and that loyalty is going to be gone with a lot of them. And so it's going to be pure production and style and fit and all of the above. And I do think that that's a good thing, especially when you look at how you're going to revamp this offensive line and get it to another level, because they have some good players. How do they get to the next level and make it great?
I mean, we're still waiting for them to be an average offensive line, despite having some good players on it. This is the sixth, fifth, whatever straight year of us talking ourselves into this should be the best offensive line Joe Burrow has played behind, and
it was
for part of the year maybe, but like their pass block win rates, according to ESPN, which is based on the ability to hold up for 2.5 seconds, was the worst in the NFL.
Yep.
So,
and it's because they had Cody Ford and, like you're banking on,
injuries,
you didn't have Orlando.
Sure.
Yeah. But to your point, that means you need depth, reliable depth. You need to invest there. And so it's, boy, oh boy, there's so many cans of worms that are getting ready to be opened, which is why you better not go anywhere, Bengals fans, because we have you covered. It's going to be a wild offseason. I don't think it's going to be a long offseason. I think it's going to be crazy. And there's going to be a lot of moving parts, Jake.
I think that feels right. They need to learn some hard lessons from their last two offseasons. And I think when you look at the potential cap casualties, and this is something that we'll probably get to this week, I think we'll get to this week, it lines up with some of the coaching changes too. So you talk about the loyalty to guys who have been here and where they made these coaching changes. Those things kind of go hand in hand, I think, as well, when you look at where some of these cap casualties may be. And we will get to that topic, I believe, this week, as we have much to get to, including candidates to replace these coaches and offseason priorities. We haven't even talked about Jamar Chase winning the Triple Crown. Jamar Chase finished up and won the Triple Crown, and we'll have award candidacies and Pro Bowl candidacies and not Pro Bowl, all pro candidacies to talk about as well. So a lot of topics here. Mock Draft Monday, not too far in the future at this point.
Wow.
And we're in the off season now, and we didn't do it this Monday. So it's got to be coming sometime soon. So a lot to get to here on Locked On Bengals as we transition, unfortunately, earlier into off-season mode than we expected this year. We will get to all of those. And thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.